Welcome to Wider View, the program that provides perspectives on the news outside the narrow confines of the mainstream media. I'm your host, Charles Dunaway. I'm delighted that Dr. Kaveh Afrasaibi is joining us again. Dr. Afrasaibi has a PhD in political science from Boston University and is taught at the University of Tehran, Boston University and Bentley University, and been a visiting scholar at Harvard, UC Berkeley, Binghamton University, and the Center for Strategic Research in Tehran. He's the author or co-author of several books, including 3 on Iran's nuclear programs. We seem to be very close to war at this point with Iran, and I wonder if you agree with that and how you think this war might differ from the war against Iraq.
That's a very important question that requires extensive response because Iraq war was fought over the WMD hoax. There's no similar justification for likely Iran war. The main complaint against Iran is that of its supposed malign behavior in the region and support for terrorism, etc. But I don't think that at this juncture, the nuclear issue is very paramount, despite some of the rhetoric from the White House. But of course, aside from that, a lot of similarities between the two. And I recall a very good New York Times op-ed by Larry Wilkerson, I believe, who pointed out that he had played a role in the Iraq war and now could see so many strong parallels, as if we are in a slow motion to repeat that unfortunate history. And a lot of other people have also penned about this issue, and I won't, rehash the matter. But with respect to Iran today, it's very clear that the United States is, and has been for some 40 years, annoyed by the fact that Iran has basically liberated itself from the clutches of U.S. domination and hegemony. And the past 4 decades have been a history of a struggle between the two countries, with the United States trying to regain the lost ground and failing to do so. And not only that, but witnessing the growing prominence of Iranian power in the region and the failed attempts to reverse some of Iran's gains, such as with respect to Syria, where U.S. and its regional allies led by Saudi Arabia and UAE, and you may throw in Israel there as well, tried to break the axis of resistance featuring Iran, Syria, and Lebanon's Hezbollah. So that attempt failed, despite billions of dollars of investment by the old chieftains of the Persian Gulf and all their support for terrorism. And that was an attempt basically to cut off Iran's bridge to the Arab world and shrink its power back to its border. And Iran was considered the winner in the Syrian war together with Russia. This partnership between the two countries also entailed increasing Russian portfolio in the Middle East in light of access given to the Russian jet fighters in the Iranian airfields and so on. So I think that a combination of factors, including fear of Iranian power, Russia's increasing role in the Middle East, the twilight of U.S. power or presence in the Middle East, which some argue is more of a myth than a reality, but nevertheless, it's a perception that was running high among some circles during the waning days of the Obama administration. So you need to factor in a lot of other variables that have to do with the Iran-Saudi rivalry, Israeli expansionism, and its quest for Middle East dominance by breaking up the Middle Eastern states. And Iran is, of course, a large, pivotal Middle East state that after experiences such as Libya and Sudan and so on, might be a candidate for disintegration so that the Israeli state can expand its influence throughout the Middle East. Because of all these factors, we are now in a situation when the Trump administration, giving carte blanche to the Saudis in the Persian Gulf, has committed itself to basically not only downgrading, but as far as it can, to disintegrate the Iranian power and be a major service to Saudis and their quest for regional domination, and a turnaround from the traditional twin pillar principle and the notion that there could be a balance of power in the Persian Gulf. So Trump administration is basically radical in its quest for remapping the balance of power in the region in Saudi's favor and to diminish Iran as far as possible. Therefore, war is not necessarily in the cards if this administration can succeed with its maximum pressure strategy to weaken Iran more and more, and it has done a good job so far. But the problem is that Iran is now pushing back, relying on its hard power, and the US has failed to build an international coalition against Iran. So the situation has become very crisis prone as a result of certain miscalculations on the part of the Trump administration, which pursued a non-diplomatic approach to Iran. So we really shouldn't buy any of these nominal gestures with respect to talk and so forth. They're all meant to preclude diplomacy, to preclude talk, under the veneer of a willingness to sit down and talk. Every time there's been a minor possibility, such as the recent visit to Iran by Japan's prime minister, it's been immediately torpedoed and sabotaged. Now, by imposing sanctions on Iran's spiritual leader and even Iran's foreign minister, the Trump administration has pretty much clogged up all venues for diplomacy with Iran. And it puts it in a basic conundrum because he knows that pursuing economic warfare increases the chance and likelihood of open warfare. And at the same time, US doesn't want to invest itself in a costly war. Mm-hmm. So something has to give here, and I'm not sure what it is.
Ayatollah Khamenei made a speech recently, and he said of the Trump administration, I'm quoting here, negotiating with people who break their promises, who go back on their commitments, and who are not committed to anything, they're not committed to morality, legality, or international conventions or anything, is ridiculous. Do you think this situation could be resolved diplomatically? Is there a way out of this?
Of course, the Iranians have every right to complain. There's a great deal of truth to what Ayatollah Khamenei has said. And I don't think that too many people can dispute that. Nevertheless, we're facing a serious standoff between a military superpower and an assertive regional power that need to pursue peaceful venues for resolving their differences. Otherwise, there'll be serious threat to regional and global peace and security. So how can this come about? Not by Trump administration's own volition, given the fact that it's dominated by Iranophobic hawks, including the president himself, and not by its regional allies who see an opportunity to defang Iran and assert the domination over the region, not by the Europeans who have proved to be feckless and unwilling to stand up to Uncle Sam. So that really doesn't leave too many other players. There's a G20 summit coming up in a day or two in Japan where other countries can exert pressure on the Trump administration, rein in on Trump, and push him toward meaningful, genuine diplomacy. China and Russia embraced Iran's president at the recent Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO's meeting in Bishkek earlier this month. And, both President Xi greeting, and President Putin have expressed solidarity with Iran. And very recently, Putin's security advisor in Russia referred to Iran as an ally and contradicted U.S.'s claim that its drone that was shot down was indeed over Iran's airspace. So these are very important gestures by Russia and China, but to what extent can be effective in blocking this crisis situation's passage to an actual war? I'm not really sure. Because there seemed to be a determined effort on the part of administration's house and the others that the Iranian foreign minister refers to as beating to trigger a war, no matter what the consequences. So, there's an element of irrationality there. At the same time, I think that there's a lesson to be drawn from Trump's decision not to hit Iran last week, which is that of the fear of Iran's strike back capability is deterrence strategy, which is one of forward defense, going after the point of origin of attack against it and not just limiting itself to purely defensive purposes. The fact that it has a lot of protege forces and friends in the region that it can marshal to hit U.S. assets in the region. So all these factors are war inhibitive factors. Because of that, instead of attacking Iran, just as Trump did vis-a-vis Syria on 2 occasions, it limited itself to cyber warfare, cyber attack, which is of mostly symbolic value. And the Iranians claim that it failed. So will Trump live up to his word of the other day that if there's another attack on a U.S. asset, they will face overwhelming response? We have to wait and see. But clearly, President Trump has now lowered the threshold for an attack, an invasion of Iran, at least rhetorically. And there could be a mismatch between his rhetoric and action, as there have been so many times in the past. But there could also be one of Trump not wanting to be embarrassed at home, and he's been questioned by media hawks. Does he have the stomach to stand up to Iran and so on? So a lot of people are egging him on, and Trump himself is basically an idiotic, mercurial president, very whimsical, right? That is obsessed with re-election and maintaining his popular base and so forth, which actually cuts both ways. A lot of his base of support voted for him because of his aversion toward costly wars. But at the same time, a lot of them are jingoistic, nationalistic, and Trump may, add to his popularity if he takes on the bad, evil mullahs. Right now, the possibilities for a diplomatic off-ramp solution are basically almost non-existent. And the Trump administration has done quite well in neutralizing the potential interlocutors, such as, Japan's leader, has absolutely no genuine interest in a meaningful dialogue with Iran. And we have even heard from French defense minister, I think just today, that he does not see any interest on the part of the United States for a dialogue with Iran. So I think that once dialogue is out of the question, then there are only 2 possibilities. The current neither war nor peace, very unstable, fragile situation, or, short circuit to war. And war and its own, devastating consequences for world economy and oil market and so forth can be an inhibitive factor. It can induce the parties toward negotiation. But you have a U.S. administration that has totally demonized the Iranian regime and has inflicted serious economic damage and is intent, without saying so, on regime change or very substantive radical transformation of the Iranian regime and see some gains from its manipulations. So right now, there's not enough heat on the Trump administration to stand back or stand down from its confrontational approach toward Iran. There needs to be a lot more heat on it by the international community to do so, in my opinion.
You wrote an article about the costs of this confrontational policy on the United States. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on what you see as the cost that the U.S. is paying for its belligerent actions toward Iran.
The mere expense of that spy plane, some put it in the range of $220 million, alone illustrates the growing cost of U.S.'s bellicosity toward Iran. And you can add a lot more. What is the ongoing cost of U.S. troop deployment in the region to so-called deter Iran? You have, several thousands stationed on these expensive naval ships and carriers, right? And the cost of maintaining them over a long period of time. We're not talking about days or weeks. This may linger on for months or even years, right? So, this could run into billions and billions of dollars. You have to add to that the associated collateral damage to U.S.'s interests. For example, we hear from Iraq that Exxon, that was planning to invest over $50 billion in Iraq oil fields, is now hesitating because of the tension between Iran and the U.S. And, U.S. is also harming its own companies by sanctioning them against doing business with Iran. And Boeing in particular lost somewhere in the neighborhood of $18 billion contract with Iran. And so a lot of potential contracts, present and future costs, direct and indirect, involved with Trump administration's confrontational policy that could easily skyrocket the moment these two countries go to war with each other. So if there is a war, then we're talking about billions and billions that some argue would even dwarf the numbers of the Iraq war, right? So is that U.S.'s national interest, and for what purpose? This administration has inflated the Iran threat, has ignored all the mischief by its Saudi allies who chop journalists in their consular office in Istanbul and are responsible for the death of thousands of innocent civilians in Yemen over the past 5 years. Trump administration has absolutely ignored the mayhem caused by Saudi Arabia and UAE in Yemen, and has been, in fact, a partner in their crime. And fortunately, we now see some initiatives by the U.S. Congress to put a stop to that, and I don't know if they will succeed. But Trump, who cried, crocodile tears for the lives of 150 Iranians that purportedly stopped him from attacking Iran, in the same vein, is now threatening to obliterate Iran and wipe it off the map, which is basically the same language that Hitler used against England and Poland in 1939 and 1940. So we're really seeing elements and very irrefutable signs of a new American fascism on the march. And I think we need to be very cognizant of the fascistic characteristics and features of this administration that is rooted probably in Trump's own penchant for Hitler, because according to his ex-wife, Hitler's books were at his, permanent fixtures at his bedside. And he uses the same language of obliteration that Hitler used against England. I've gone and compared, And so, if we are indeed dealing with a new fascist phenomenon, the only way to counter that is to build a global anti-fascist front, one that would push the United States back toward respecting international law and norms and principles against violating other countries' sovereignty and instigating wars of choice, not necessity.
I want to turn, though, to Iran. the U.S. has actually been conducting war against Iran through a brutal sanctions regime for many, many years now. I know that must be taking quite a toll on the Iranian people. The Supreme Leader made another speech in which he outlined the steps that he thinks the nation should take to overcome the U.S. sanctions, things like achieving more self-sufficiency in agriculture and various other things. Can Iran continue to resist these sanctions and continue to manage itself under this harsh sanctions regime?
I think so, but it will not be easy, and there will be a lot of suffering involved, particularly on the part of ordinary Iranians, because this administration cruelly is forbidding even, the transfer of basic medicine to Iran, despite saying and claiming the opposite. A lot of Iranians, those patients in hospital, the elderly and so forth, suffered during the previous rounds of sanctions and are bound to suffer even more now. Iran has no choice but to resist and try to prevail. And it has some resources. Fortunately, there's been a lot of rainfall this year, and irrespective of, the flooding, now the dams are full, and, this is very good news for Iran's agriculture. Iran also has a hefty future development fund that has been tapping into to address the budget shortfalls. It has continued a lot of the basic subsidies to, the population, because a lion's share of the government's budget actually goes for government subsidies such as, basic food staples and so on, education, healthcare, and it's a very populistic regime that has remained basically constant throughout these 40 years, with some minor changes here and there. So the basic populist nature of the regime, Islamic populist nature of the regime, has not undergone any major transformation. The government has tried to appease the population, even more so in light of the onslaught of U.S. sanctions, by maintaining those basic social welfare policies. This is a recipe for survival and maintaining the links between state and civil society. I think that time is on the side of the Iranian government, not the Trump administration, because for one thing, there are a lot of recalcitrant allies, such as India, Japan, South Korea, the Europeans, who really hate this sanction regime. It's contrary to their economic interests. And, they may resort to clandestine trade with Iran, or, black market oil trade with Iran and so on, as Iran did in the past. And Russia funneled a lot of Iran oil in the past. It may do so again, So I think that Iran, with its vast experience in sanctions busting, will survive and will not come to the negotiation table under these harsh terms set by the Trump administration, which is tantamount to surrender. And this will be another case of U.S. foreign policy blunder and, exacting a toll on the administration as time goes on. So there are a lot of conflicting signs with respect to the present crisis affecting either side.
Well, one of the things that the U.S. generally does when it has to confront a nation that does not want to cooperate with U.S. hegemony is to foment rebellion or at least dissension within that country. And I know there's been talk here about, the split between the reformists and the so-called hardliners within Iran, and also the role of the MEK, which is very close and has been very close to Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton. Do you think either of those could pose some kind of problem for the current Iranian government?
I doubt it, because Iranians are very nationalistic, been rallying behind the government in its effort to neutralize the American pressure, which is widely perceived as wrong and unjust. So whereas there were some sporadic economic protests when Trump instituted the sanctions, now you don't see too much of that because Iranians by and large realize who's responsible for the economic woes. It's not the Iranian government that was signing major lucrative deals with the Europeans and others, creating jobs and opportunities, and all that has gone out the door because of the US sanctions. That is rather Uncle Sam. I think that the Iranian government has actually been strengthened politically as a result of Trump's confrontational policy. Maybe economically weakened, but politically it has gained strength. Sure, there are divisions between the various political factions, but Iran considers itself an Islamic democracy and a pluralistic system where different political parties and factions vying for influence in parliament and elsewhere. That has not changed as a result of the US pressure. Iran has had regular elections, turnover of positions and posts and so on, despite the external pressures, and has not succumbed to the tendency to, institute a military regime, etc., in the name of national security, as a lot of other countries may have. So that's to Iran's credit, that has maintained a semblance of pluralism, and you can see that in, the number of Iran dailies at the newsstands every day and the different points of views expressed by them and so on. So, no, I don't think that Trump administration will have any success at all in fomenting division and tension within Iran. NK is a non-entity as far as Iranian people are concerned. It lost its legitimacy when it decided with Saddam Hussein and his invading army, back in the 1980s. It's a very marginal issue that even the Trump officials are coming to realize. There are some terrorist groups outside Iran, in Pakistan, Balochistan, that the US has been helping to, attack Iran cross-border. And, that might continue. But I don't think they will have much effect on the political calculations inside Iran. So the region is robust, is firmly grounded, and has gained a strength standing up to US and is bullying. And the Iranian people are very dissatisfied economically, but politically they understand where the source of the problem is.
Thanks again to Dr. Kaveh Afrasaibi. You can find links to his recent articles in the show notes at widerviewradio.podbean.com. The views expressed on Wider View are those of myself and my guests and may not reflect the views of the management of the radio station to which you're listening. Our aim is to provoke you to think outside the box and question the narratives you hear from the mainstream media and our national leaders. I hope we have succeeded. I'm your host, Charles Dunaway. Thanks for listening.